This started as a simple 2D image, and now it's a multicolored 3D printed wall art. In this video, I'm going to show you my workflow on how I use Hitem3D's new 3D relief tool feature to create this 3D printed multicolored piece. And trust me, because it's fast and easy and requires no 3D modeling experience. So let's get into it. The first thing you'll need is an account set up on the Hitem3D AI 3D modeling platform. You can find a link in the description. It's free to sign up and you should have enough credits to at least try this out for yourself without any charge. The second thing you'll need is a multicolor 3D printer. Something like a Bamboo Lab or an Anycubic printer. Any of the current modern printers usually have that capability. And that's basically all you need. To make things simple, this video will also have chapters below, and it'll be broken up into 3 main sections. The first segment will cover the images that we need to actually use this 3D relief feature. The second segment will be diving into the Hitem3D AI platform, and the third and final section will be going into the Slicer software and then adding color and sending it to the print. And please leave comments on the video because I'd love to see what people are making with this workflow. Okay, let's start getting into the details. This first segment is about the images that we need to create this 3D relief feature. So this image is what I used to create the model that's featured in the beginning of this video. And I used Gemini to create this, as you can see the little watermark down the bottom. Now you can use any AI image generation tool you want. ChatGPT, Gemini, Midjourney, whatever you're comfortable with, you can use that. But the important thing is there's a few key details. So with this image, you can see it's fairly basic, I suppose. There's not a lot going on, and I've purposely tried to simplify it. And there's also a fair bit of contrast happening here as well, because the way the 3D relief feature is really working is trying to translate the contrast in the image into a 3D depth map. And so an image like this is a perfect example of what will work well. We can see it's got clearly defined leaves and vines, and the flowers have shadows on the petals that create a sort of sense of depth to the image. And then you also have this base behind it as well. So it's all sitting on a flat base and it's kind of building up, and you can really see that depth in the image. And here's an example of another image that will work well. You can see there's a clear base and it's got that clear contrast through the shadows and those gradients that the 3D modeling tool is going to be able to draw from to create our depth. Now I'll leave it on you on how you can prompt these images. If you're interested in what my prompts are, leave a comment and I can help out. But I think a good way of starting is simply going to Google and searching something like relief map art. And then from there you can go to images and you can start to get an idea of this kind of effect. And maybe map wasn't a good example because it's giving me maps, but maybe we just say relief depth art. So here we can start to see we've got something like this one would probably produce something really nice. And from that image, we could actually bring that into something like Midjourney or Gemini. I find is my favorite at the moment because it has Nano Banana 2. So we could use this image as a reference in Gemini and tell it to create a similar image, but in a completely different theme. So maybe you're looking at like a medieval theme or a fantasy theme, and you can explain the things you want in it, like dragons and knights or whatever it is, and it will do a good job at interpreting what you want into an image. Play around with your image prompting and you should be able to get something like this. Another good term you can search for is abstract relief depth art. And this should give you some good references to start from as well and play around with to see what the AI tool will generate when we turn it into a 3D relief map. So that's the first part done. Getting your image isn't really the hard part. Let's move on to the next part. In this segment, we're going to start using our AI tool to create the 3D relief map. And the platform we're using is Hitem3D. I find this is a really good platform. It really impresses me with the 3D model results that it generates. And they have just released this new feature, which is the 3D relief. After you sign up for an account, you should have some free credits you can play around with. So do that first. And then once you're logged in, you can go over to the top left, which is the 3D relief, and click on that. And what we need to do is import the image that we just generated. So we're going to start with this one. It just takes a moment to upload. There is an option here to remove the background, but let's just generate with the background to start with and see what it does. So we click on generate and it shouldn't take too long and we'll generate our model. So we're going to drop in that other image that we made, which was the father's hand holding the child's hand, and we'll generate that. So our first result is complete, and if we check that out, it's looking pretty cool. But there are some other settings we can play around with to create even more depth if we wanted to. So this is our general model, and you can see it's picked it up quite well. You can click on the rendering result, and that looks pretty cool. So the first thing over here is your settings panel, and you can remove the base, which is going to try and remove all the flat base or what it thinks is the base. And we can adjust the threshold here if we really wanted to, so we could create an effect like this. And if you start going too far, it starts eating into it a lot. So you really want to just play around with it, see where that best point is, and then this might be the result you want. I want to keep the base in mind, so we're going to leave it on solid. Next is the relief shape. So it's set to square currently, but you could also put it in a circle, which is pretty interesting. But let's keep it as a square. The next is the proportional scaling. So this is just increasing the size of it, and you can see here in millimeters what the size is. And we'll just leave that on what the default was. And our next one is the sculpting mode, which is convex or concave. And we have a little slider here, so we can see how it is creating more depth as we pull away. And you don't want to go too far, especially if you're 3D printing this, because it's just going to pull out all those features way too much and it's not going to look right. But maybe that's an effect that works for your design, so play around with it. And also you can reverse this. So in the concave setting, we're actually etching into the print itself. We're going in that reverse direction, which would be really cool if you're making like a mold or something. You could use an image to create a mold and then use the concave feature to push into that mold. But what we could do, we can see it's cutting in the back here, is actually just increasing our base thickness like that so that it cuts in properly. I'll just bring that back to the default and we'll change that back to convex. And I don't want it to be too deep. I just want a little bit of depth. Obviously, the more height there is, the longer this is going to take to 3D print. But not enough height is obviously going to take away all the work we're trying to do. So just play around with that setting, find somewhere that works best for your design. Let's say 2.9 should be fine. And then finally, we have the bend mode. So instead of being a flat object, we can actually start to curve this around. So currently it's off, so it's just a flat object, but we could make that a positive curve. So you can see it's starting to bend around in that direction, or we could make it a negative curve. So it's now bending inwards. And we can also change the bend axis as well. So instead of the XZ, we can go the YZ. So instead of bending around this way, we're now bending around that way. And finally, we can change the bend angle. So we can go all the way to a full tube if we wanted to, or we could go to a positive and basically make part of a cup. That's a pretty cool feature, just doing it like that, bending it all the way around. But let's go back to our off. And then finally, we need to export this. So down the bottom, we have our export. It's just in STL format, and we can click on download and give it a sec, and that will start downloading. And here is that other example I did with the two hands holding. So again, we can just increase our thickness a little bit, play around with that. And I think that's fine. We might make this one a circle one like that. And then we will download this. Okay, so that's it. That's how easy it is to create these 3D relief models. No modeling required, just chuck your image in, play with some settings, export, and then we can move on to the third and final segment. A little trickier, but I think the fun part, which is actually coloring the model and then 3D printing it. So let's get into those details. So in segment 3, we're going to start looking at importing our model into our slicing software and coloring it and then sending it off for 3D printing. For me, I'm going to be using my Bamboo Lab printer, and so I'm using Bamboo Studio as my slicing software, but you could use anything like Anycubic or Creality, whatever you're comfortable with, and of course, whatever 3D printer you have. They pretty much all work the same these days, so if you follow along with this, the settings will be most likely close enough that you can copy for your own software. So the first thing we need to go is over to our Prepare tab, and then we need to import our model. So here it is now. Now this is a really small print, so let's scale that up a bit by going to our scale, and we can just increase this maybe 300%. That's probably a good size. We'll also need to set our filaments, which you can do by probably just syncing to your printer. That's what I've got loaded at the moment, but I want to change this around just to demonstrate. So we'll go to a PLA basic. Maybe I want the base to be a black. The second one, I'll want to use probably a green, and finally maybe a magenta color for the roses. So these are going to be the 3 colors I work with. If you have a 4th color, or if you have multiple systems connected to give you even more colors, then go nuts. You can do all that yourself. But this will just give you the basic workflow to start with. Now we can click on our model and go to our painting tools, and we might want to start changing this to green. So you could change your pen size and start painting this in, but you can quickly notice this is going to get really difficult because you start getting overlapping where we don't want it to. We want to keep that base black. And so I found there's a better way of doing this. So we're going to undo that. We can also try triangles, but you can see these triangles are quite dense. And it's going to take a long time to go through and try and paint all those triangles accurately as well. So that's not a good way. You can try the fill feature and see how well it does, but honestly, it seems to just want to fill in the whole thing. So that's not going to be very good. We can change that to edge detection as well. But again, it's not really going to work for us in that case. It can work a little bit better here, but still it's cutting into it too much. So there's a trick to this, and let me show you what I like to do. So I like to use the height range, and this will basically cover everything layer by layer to a height you specify. You can also tell it the range for the painting, which is your height range, and it will actually paint in whole chunks that way. But I like to keep it small, and then I can fine tune where I want it. The other trick is try and set your main color from the beginning. So what I mean by that is the black is going to be really easy to fill in with our height tool. All the rest, all the green parts are what's going to be the challenging part. And so we're not sitting here trying to paint this whole thing in green like this. What we can do instead is we'll go back, we'll exit our painting mode. We'll actually change the whole model by clicking on it. And in this case, I've got number 2 is my green. So I can hit 2 on the keyboard and it changes the whole model to green. And now we can go back to our painting tool using our layer, and we can switch to 1, which is my black. I'm going to look at the bottom of the model, and I'm just going to start slowly clicking and dragging up on the height. So you can see how it's kind of painting it as I go. And we can just go a little bit closer here because I want to basically just finish on this very final few layers where that transition starts. So we can click, we can drag it, just painting in that area, little by little, until we feel like we hit that final one. If we have a look, that's pretty much it. We could maybe go one more. So we can just carefully bring it up to there. And I think that's pretty good. So if you look around, just make sure there's no like green islands sticking up, which you might want to paint over. But that's how I do the bulk done. That's kind of the easy part. Now the next part is the more manual process, is these basically the roses. And you could try and use your height here. So we'll switch over to our magenta, and we could start trying to find the highest point basically. And we could start painting down, and we can see we can't go too much further because it's going to start painting all these areas. So let's just undo. We're going to try that again. So you can see it's not going to work too well, but that's a pretty cool effect as well. If you want to play around with different ways of doing this, you could do something like that, but that's not what I'm trying to do here. We could try our section, our fill tool, and changing that to edge detection. And we can just go around. This might work on some of the bigger parts like this, but we can see it's eating into too much. You can see there it's taken out way too much, so it's not really good at that. How about this part? This one's all right because we got some fairly large chunks together, but it's pretty much this process. So, and if at any point you feel like you're getting a bit lost on what needs to be colored, just bring up that old image that you used as a reference in HiTem and have a quick look at it and see where you need to keep on coloring, and just keep going through this process. So I might also need to start using my circle or my triangle tool I like to use, and just going through and painting this. It's a bit of a slow process, this part, but just keep going through, and then once you're all done, we'll move on to the next section. So I'm going to fast forward through this so you don't have to watch it all, and then we'll come back when it's all ready to go to the printing stage. Okay, I've finished the painting for this model. Now, it's not perfect. It is quite a dense 3D mesh, so it can be hard to color in some of the areas, especially down the bottom where the triangles are really small. But I found just using a mix of the triangle tool, and you can just go along and kind of paint in the border, and then you can go back and use the fill tool, which will fill in everything within a border. So you can kind of chunk sections out by doing that. And then whenever I want to just make big sweeping painting changes, I can use the circle tool, bring up the size and just do like a whole section like this, and then basically just fill it in with the fill tool. So play around with the tools, and that's pretty much how I went about it. And once you're finished, you should have something like this. Now on to the final part, which is 3D printing. So for this particular model, what the settings I like to use is I like to bump up the layer height quite a bit, but then I like to click on the model and go to what's called variable layer height. And I can click on that and go click on adaptive and then click on smooth and then just finish. What that's doing is you set a fairly large layer height, so in this case 0.24, and what it's going to do is wherever it can smooth that layer height out, it will actually use a really small layer height in between, so that's why it's a variable layer height. And this allows you to print faster where it doesn't need a lot of detail and there's not a lot of curving, and then add finer detail when it starts to make like rounded corners and it needs that finer layer height. So it's a mix between detail and faster printing, but overall it does add a little bit of extra time as well. Now we're not going to need any supports, which is good for this particular print because it is just printed flat and everything kind of going up. So there's really nothing to support. And for my strength, this isn't a structural kind of print, so really we can cut down on the infill and try and save some material as well. So what I like to use for my sparse infill is actually crosshatch, and I like to bump that down to probably 10%. And then we can just click on slice plate. Our slice is done, and this has a total print time of 9 hours. And it's going to use a total of 155 grams of filament. I'll show you one more example of painting your model because this one will be super easy. We're just going to use 2 colors. What I'm thinking is for this hand holding relief model, we'll just use 2 filaments. So we're going to use a black base and then a marble for the hands. What I want to do first is use that painting trick with painting by layer, and I'll want to reverse what it currently is because it's going to be a lot easier just to paint the base all the way to as far as I can using black. So what I want to do is make the main model my PLA marble. So I can just hit 2. So that's going to make everything marble. And then I can go into the painting tool, switch to my number 1, which is going to be my PLA basic in black, and then use the height range tool. Look at the bottom of it, and I'll start on the very base of the model and just click and drag, slowly bring it up as far as I can, and then I'm just going to stop there, and then I'm going to look from the top a little bit more so I can make sure I don't go too far into the hands, and we'll just continue on, click, dragging up slowly until I can see it's starting to eat into that top layer now. A little bit more, maybe one more, and one more. And I think that is pretty good right there. I think that's where we can leave it. We can click on our painting tool. I need to move this block out of the way, and that's pretty much it. I need to change those settings again, so I'm going to change my infill to crosshatch, drop that down to 10%. I'm going to click on the model, go to my variable layer height, making sure it's on 0.24, change the variable layer height, say adaptive and smooth. And you can see all that green area is where it's going to be changing that layer to a really small layer, whereas it's going to use quite a large layer on that base. It's going to quickly print through the base, and then it'll start to slow down as it uses a finer layer height. And we can click again on the tool, and then we can simply slice and send that off to the print. So that's been my workflow on using the new 3D relief feature in HiTem 3D. I really recommend HiTem 3D. Check the link in the description to try it out. Sign up for an account, just use the free credits, and you should be able to play around with it and generate some examples like this. As you can see, just the simple results that I've made are quite stunning, and this is just the surface level of what you can do with this tool in combination with 3D printing your results. Play around with your images and definitely share in the comments what you have tried out, and I'd love to take a look at what you've done. Don't forget to check out HiTem 3D. Thanks to them for sponsoring this video. If you found value in this tutorial, then please consider subscribing to the channel, and thanks for watching.